Welcome back. And if you've just joined us, you're tuned into the Mid-Morning Show with myself, Nafeesa Dangor. And we've had such phenomenal people on these segments this morning talking to us about tweens, encouraging us to change our lives during this COVID-19 period and creating that support structure and helping us actually see the light through this very darkness that we've been facing in many directions, and talking about that darkness and having to sit in a space where you feel you don't know how to move forward. I have a motto. I always believe that we don't wake up every morning to be mediocre. It's about having to get ambitious and ask ourselves, what is it that we're going to go for this morning, reach one of our goals and attain something in our lives. And we're going to be talking to a really, should we say, inspirational gentleman. His name is Zaid Ismail. He's an author, a coach for life, a mental health advocate who believes that we need to change the narrative of how we see ourselves. He's also a single parent who is closely connected to the struggles of youth to find their place in this, should we say, crazy world. Zaid is passionate about encouraging others towards understanding their experience as human beings so that they may learn how to value themselves beyond the self-talk in the mirror. Now, today we're going to be dealing with a very good topic. It's called, are we living on autopilot? Are we sleepwalking through life? And I think that's so apt because through COVID-19, we've all been in that space in some way. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you so much once again for joining me. It's always inspirational having to talk to you because I think, I don't know about the team and myself, we always have this ideology that after we spoke to Zaid Ismail, we're in a happier, better mood and we know how to deal with certain situations. So a warm welcome to the Mid-Morning Show with myself, Nafeesa Dangor, and thank you so much for taking the time off to join us.
Wa alaikum salam. Jazakallah once again for having me on your show.
Always the pleasure is ours. Talk to me, I spoke to you the last time, being a life coach, there's so many purposes that you intend fulfilling. So let's first talk about the purposes before we tap into the subject.
The purpose, I think, more often than not, and it keeps resonating every single time I get into one of these discussions, is that we need to very desperately change the narrative of how it is that we look at ourselves, how it is that we experience life. So within that context, I always like to challenge what it is that we assume to be what's driving our behavior and what's influencing our thoughts, because more often than not, we don't realize that we actually give up our ability to shape our lives when we believe that we're subject to external influences and forces.
Yes, and I think a lot of the times we find ourselves in a situation where those external forces are they driving us? We're not driving ourselves. We're allowing that to happen to ourselves. We're looking at what's happening to us from the outside and saying, oh my goodness, I cannot deal with this. This is not something that I'm going to be able to do. I'm sitting in a rut and I don't know where to start. And many an individual in that particular space at this period in time, of course, from the beginning of COVID-19.
Yes, absolutely. And a lot of the time we're so focused on the things that are completely outside of our control that we give up any hope of being able to influence or manage the things that are within our control. So we become obsessed with the things that we can't control, and we convince ourselves that it's out of our hands and we just need to go with the flow and respond as best as we can without believing we can actually take something good out of it or even contribute something good towards it.
Now, I love the topic that you chose that we need to speak this morning. I kind of related to it because I see many people stuck in that situation when you say, are you living on autopilot? And I mean, as we know, autopilot is something you just press a button and it just keeps going. We're not finding our own direction, and that's what it is. We also see sleepwalking through life. We're just getting up every single day, being in this mundane, mediocre situation and not changing it for the better.
Yes. Autopilot is a very interesting thing because being on autopilot is a very real thing. I agree with it 100%. That a lot of times we get into autopilot mode without realizing it, or sometimes we even do it willingly. But what we believe is causing us to go into autopilot mode, that's the part that I like to challenge, because that's what we usually get wrong. As long as we believe that autopilot mode is something that happens to us, we're again going to be victims trying to survive something rather than owning our space and owning our life, and doing something constructive to change it towards what it is that we actually want to get out of it.
So talk to us about this autopilot emotional well-being, because I think a lot of people don't actually understand what it means for them. I think many people don't even realize that they're in autopilot mode.
Yes. In fact, there's all sorts of theories about what drives autopilot, and many of those theories come from the belief that our brain goes into energy-saving mode because it requires too much energy to consciously think of things and things like that. But I disagree with that completely, because if you look around you, you'll find that the most energetic and inspirational people are the ones that are not in autopilot mode. So it doesn't make sense to believe that autopilot mode is there to save energy, because if anything, it drains energy, because it gives us very little reason to look forward to the next moment, because everything becomes so routine and so monotonous and redundant. So autopilot mode, I believe, and this might be a controversial perspective, but it's never stopped us before. Autopilot mode, I believe, is what happens when we give up hope of being able to influence the course of our lives. When we believe that we're inconsequential to the outcomes of our lives, what we do is we surrender to what is safe and what works. And when we surrender to what is safe and what works, that's when we get into this autopilot mode, because then we hold on to everything that keeps us out of trouble, that avoids controversy, that avoids confrontation, that maintains our significance in our role as whatever that might be, a parent or an employee or a boss or whatever it is. But we get into autopilot mode when we believe that we're incapable of making anything more out of our lives than what we already have.
I so agree with you there. What sort of things would we as individuals look out for to know that we're in autopilot mode, and how can we change that for the better? Because as I was saying, I mean, I could be sitting here and being in autopilot mode and I wouldn't even know.
I think it's quite a broad answer, right? Because I think autopilot mode can be anything from waking up and feeling exhausted because there's nothing to look forward to waking up and feeling kind of mildly enthusiastic about your day because you know what it is that you can expect to come from it. So it's not a matter of if you're appearing depressed or if you feel down in the dumps that you're in autopilot mode, nor does it mean that if you're happy about your life and where you're at, that you're not in autopilot mode. And I know that sounds like it's complicating things, but it really isn't. What we need to be looking for is when you're done with something, when you've finished your day and you're getting ready to turn in at night, do you feel a sense of accomplishment? Do you feel as if you made a difference, as if your presence made a difference, as if your unique contribution was valued and created value for others? Because if you have that sense about you, then chances are very good you're not in autopilot mode. But if you get into this rut where you're good at what you do the same thing every day, you might be somewhat better than the average, but it doesn't really push you beyond that. It doesn't challenge you creatively or anything like that. Then chances are very good that you're in autopilot mode.
Yeah, and I think it's about finding that comfort zone, because you're sitting in the space where you feel, okay, I'm in a comfort zone and I'm fine and I'm sorted. So I don't need to really reach out to go anywhere else. And I think that's what happens to many of us that are in those situations. When you say sleepwalking through life, I would say that the way I look at it is, we're actually not aware of what is happening in our lives and taking cognizance of it to say that, you know what, I'm living in this mundane situation and not changing anything that I'm in for the better, and not asking ourselves what is it that we can do to move ourselves forward from the particular spaces that we're in.
Yes. sleepwalking is typical, or sleepwalking through life is typical of us believing that there's really no point in hoping for things to be better than they are, or we just convince ourselves that we're just so blessed for what we have that we should focus on protecting it rather than growing it. And that's another thing that we do as well, is we convince ourselves that gratitude means to just continue to protect and defend what we have. It doesn't extend to the point of us believing that gratitude is actually more about focusing on our ability to create value and to create goodness in the lives of those around us, so that we might extend ourselves into those spaces rather than being safe and only doing what is expected of us.
Would you say we see ourselves in a bad light, and that's what creates a lot of the problem many a time? Because there's a lot of people that I come into contact with, and they look at themselves in such a negative way that you have to literally sit them down and make them see what it is in them that's so unique and so potentially good about their, should we say, character and their behavior, and trying to make them reach that, should we say, wake up call from sleepwalking through life. I find myself in that situation, interacting with people where I've had to then edge them on to be able to see the better in themselves.
I think that's an immensely important point, because one of the most pervasive, most common challenges I find with many clients in this space is that they don't realize that they actually view themselves through the eyes of the people around them. And what that means is that at some point in time, they might have extended themselves a little bit to do something that was uniquely them. And because the people around them didn't quite appreciate it or connect with the value of it, or didn't even notice, they convinced themselves that maybe it wasn't of any value. So they abandoned it, and they instead were driven by what others recognize as value within them. And what this does is it shifts our focus to being one of needing that validation and inclusion, rather than connecting with the value that we believe others will benefit from if we just contributed our unique value into that moment or into their lives. And that's how we lose our.
Would you say this leads to us losing our identity? Because, I mean, as I said when I started off, we're all unique individuals, and each of us has something to bring to the table. And each of us has our strengths that we can use in an environment to better things and better ourselves and better others. Would you say that this is the biggest problem that you find going around?
At the risk of sounding cynical, this brings up 2 points. It brings up 2 points for myself. The one is that we can only lose our identity if we actually claimed it in the first place, right? And many people haven't even claimed their identity because they've been so focused on being shaped by meeting expectations all their life. I've had clients that are in their 40s, 50s, and 60s who were only starting to discover the fact that they actually didn't know who they were and what they stood for. Sure. Because they were so defined by the roles that they needed to fill in everyone else's space. The second point it reminds me of is that old saying that says that I want to be unique, just like everyone else. And that's where we lose ourselves.
That is so true, because it's the second half of the sentence that is where we go wrong. When you tell yourself you want to be unique, it's having to tap into you yourself and figure out your own characteristics and your own strengths and your own weaknesses. And of course, in the same instance, going out into society and not allowing your value to be stripped from yourself. And I think that's an important point that you're trying to bring out, is to be able to tell yourself that I have value and that I do have certain things. Because I have a lot of people that I find are in a situation where, they just put their heads down and think, oh, well, I'm really useless. I'm not worth the while. And people don't take to me in a hurry. And I think we need to start turning that thinking pattern around, where people need to start looking at themselves rather from the positive as opposed to the negative. And as you were saying, it's not important. It's what you think of yourself.
Yes. But you won't know what you think of yourself if your entire self-worth is based on what others think of you or how they've treated you. And this is one of the reasons why we lose ourselves to our roles that we play in our lives. Our roles as parents, our roles as children or spouses or whatever it is, right? And so that that whole thing of trying to claim our uniqueness and to be bold about it, we focus so much on needing courage and avoiding fear and overcoming this and overcoming that, that we forget one very, very simple yet important aspect of that. And that is that we need to believe with conviction that what it is that we want to create will really genuinely, sincerely benefit others. If we don't believe in the value of it, we're going to consistently look around and expect someone to validate it for us before we actually pursue it. And that's the equivalent of asking other people for permission before you pursue your dream. And the moment you're doing that, you're setting yourself up for failure, and you're definitely heading towards autopilot mode.
That's so true. What advice would you give people that are in those situations to say, this is how you need to start looking at yourself? I want to actually create this positive vibe here before we leave today, where I leave people with something valuable to think about. We want to give them some food for thought, for them to look at themselves and say, this is what I'm going to start doing as of now. Because, I always believe sorry, I'm interrupting there, but I always believe change doesn't happen tomorrow and it doesn't happen later, because we have this habit as human beings to say, oh, I'm going to start this tomorrow. This is what I'm going to do. Tomorrow I'm going to be this person. Tomorrow I'm going to do this. Tomorrow I'm going to do that. But it's all about the now that matters, not the tomorrow.
I think that's a big question.
Have I put you on the spot there?
No, but I think it's. I always profess to try to keep things as simple as possible, because the moment we overcomplicate things, we just lose ourselves to the complication, right? So, if I had to say what it is that we needed to do to own our space, the one thing we need to do that we don't do often enough is that we need to recognize that it wasn't the trials of our life that have revealed, that have created the skills and the abilities that we have to be able to overcome adversity. And this is an important point, because so often we go through something that is difficult or that is really challenging, and then when we come out of it, we think, okay, well, that was needed for us to learn how to deal with it. And I disagree with that for one very, very important reason. If we recognize that it was our innate ability to overcome that trial in the first place that made it possible for us to persevere and to prevail beyond it, we'll recognize that the ability to do that, the ability to face all of these difficulties in our lives, is something that's innate within us. It's something that we've been created with. And if we connect with that and we recognize that that is what makes it possible for us to be successful in the face of adversity, we won't see adversity as being something so daunting and so challenging and so overwhelming. We'll simply face it for what it is and persevere, because we have it within us to overcome it. And this reminds me of that last ayah in Surah Baqarah, I think it is, that says that no soul will bear burden greater than it can bear, right? And the reason for that is not because our taqdeer has been defined that we'll only be given challenges that we are capable of facing. No, it's because we have been created with the ability to overcome every trial that might exist in this world. And if we recognize that, we'll be more focused on how to overcome rather than, oh boy, who's going to help me? Who do I turn to? Where's my support structure? And all of those things. And that changes the way we look at life in a very, very profound way.
Yeah, definitely profound and deep, because I think we need to firstly realize that the Almighty is our biggest support structure. And once we forget that, then we're definitely losing our direction and our path.
Yes. And when we understand the true meaning of this innate strength that we've been created with to be able to overcome, when we understand that and when we connect with that, we'll realize that it's not a matter of having the right tools and developing the right skills. It's about believing that it is possible, so that you look for the opportunity to overcome rather than believing that it's impossible and needing support to overcome. We need to shift that thinking, the way we see ourselves, and recognizing that we are not defined by how others see us. We need to be defined by how we see ourselves, but we won't see ourselves clearly unless we start recognizing that when we judge ourselves, we're judging ourselves because we're still considering how others expect us to be or what they think we're capable of.
Okay. Give us one last message before we go. We seem to be running out of time. Also, quickly, I find it nice to have read your profile to see how passionate you are about helping the youth with their struggles. And I think that's something that I'd like to commend you on, because they are the future. And I think a lot of the times we pen on what is happening with adults and not realize that the youth also are going through many a struggle of their own.
Yes. I think youth face so many struggles that the adults are completely detached from, that it makes it that much more difficult. The most important message I always want to impart to both youth and adults alike is that life shapes adults towards focusing on probabilities, because they're so familiar with the kind of risks and the trends that happen around how things play out. So adults become focused on probabilities, whereas youth, because they don't have the experience, but they have the idealism and they have the clarity of focus, because they haven't been tainted by failure as much as adults have, they focus on possibility. And if we take the possibilities that youth are focused on, and we take the probabilities that adults are focused on, and we bring those together, we'll end up with the opportunity to be able to collaborate with youth in a way that will create massive value for both sides. And that will nurture a sense of self and a sense of identity and inclusion and purpose in youth that I think is sorely lacking right now, because we're so focused on shaping the youth into believing that the only thing they need to do is prepare themselves for a life of servitude to their profession and to their families, that they don't even consider that they are capable and that they've been created to contribute something much greater than just filling responsibilities.
That is so true. We want to thank you so much for joining us on the show today. Always inspirational having to chat with you. I think you make us look at things in a very different light, in a positive perspective, so that, we realize that there's something deeper out there. And we also realize our purposes that we left on this earth with. So Jazakallah for joining us today and inspiring us in a different direction. And I'm hoping that all of us get out of that autopilot mode and we stop sleepwalking and we find our way. Thank you so much. You take care of yourself, and we hope to tap into you real soon.
Okay, alhamdulillah, Jazakallah for having me again, and it's always a pleasure.
Jazakallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
That was Zaid Ismail, author, coach for life, and a mental health advocate. Definitely making us think and should we say reflect on where we are and where we'd like to head to. Are we in autopilot? Would we like to walk through life sleepwalking all the time? Or are we going to change things by the types of advice that he's given us? We seem to be running out of time, but there's something that I would like to leave you with this afternoon, also from Fearless Motivation. It says, there are 3 simple rules in life. If you do not go after what you want, you will never have it. If you do not ask, the answer will always be no. If you do not step forward, you will always be in the same place. So there we go. I hope that motivated you in many directions. It was only a pleasure joining you, and I'm glad that you joined me this morning to be able to entice you in better spaces, better places. And I hope we've educated you to those related topics that you're encountering every single day in your life. From myself and the team, wish you nothing but the best going forward towards the end of the week. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.